Okay. So, if I can introduce the first speaker, Bishop Silvan Evans, and talk about Isaac Williams, 1802, 1865, a cleric, theologian, and a bard. As Bishop Wynne was born in 1946, his father was a vicar in Pembrokeshire, and he was educated in Hawke, Aberystwyth, and Cardiff University, where he read archaeology and was especially interested in the time from the departure of the Romans to the arrival of Normans. And he continued to study in Oxfordshire on the early churches of Wales, and then he became a canon in St David's, and then he was serving in Carmarthenshire and was warden and ordinance and lecturer in Trinity College and the head of the theology and religious studies centre in Lampeter, and then he became dean of St David's and bishop from 2008 until he retired 2016. And he, after retiring, he has been studying the history of the Cathedral of St David's and the diocese from 1666 onwards, especially. So I want to draw attention to a collection of books in the library at St David's Cathedral. It's a special collection. Well, what's special about the collection? There are 6,000 books in it, but there are 29 books, especially bound in red leather, and it's a collection written by an individual, and these books are considered part of the treasures of the cathedral because they're in a glass case. It's a collection of work by a Welshman, although written in English. He spent most of his life in England. He was born in Ceredigion, but brought up in London. He was a cleric, but never served in the Anglican Church in Wales. He was an important Anglican religion, but he specialized in the mysteries of the faith and how to draw people into those mysteries, and emphasis on the discipline of the county. And he was a hymn writer, even though not many of his hymns are sung today. There's no translation of any of them in Cynion. He was a curate throughout his ministry. He was a poet, although although Christina Rossetti was part of the same Catholic movement in the Victorian age, who was much more well known. But looking at this collection, we see a portrait of the Reverend Isaac Williams, PD, the Welsh Tractarian, and although he lived for 65 years, he was often seriously ill with consumption. This was Isaac Williams, and part of the first generation of the Oxford movement generation. Williams is the one we know least about compared to Keble, Newman, Froude, and Pusey. But we do know from the research on Dr. John Vaughan about him, about his contribution to the Oxford movement, and about his theology and the reserve doctrine, which was central to his work. It was the idea of opening up the mysteries of the faith gradually for people who were coming to faith, and he was therefore had this idea of being very careful in your handling of the faith, and as so many of us, I'm also dependent on O.W. Jones's research into the Bisley Circle, and I also want to recognize my father's contribution, Father Silvan Evans, and his work on the Oxford movement in the Bangor and St David's diocese, and Isaac's own autobiography, published in 1851, is important. Well, although he worked in a limited field, he also had very wide interests. There are sermons, essays, poetry, translations, hymns, and there's far too much to discuss in this time available. I'm going to talk about his family, his connections with North Cardiganshire, his work in Oxfordshire, his interest in Oxford, and his interest in architecture, and his interest in the church in Wales. And that's enough, and therefore I'd like to generalize a bit about him. Almost all the books in the collection, there is the writing with the author's compliments in his writing, and they were presented immediately from the press to his older brother, Matthew Davis Williams, 1800-1860, and he had them bound and put his own initials, MDW, on them. So how did they come to the cathedral? Because Isaac Williams only came once to St David's, and that was in the company of Matthew David Williams. He made a pilgrimage, as you say, to Pusey, that every Welsh person should go on pilgrimage to St David's once in life. I am going to quote parts of the poem in English, which came from that visit, because like another one on the cathedral, which was 1838, was about a mystical cathedral representing the Catholic ideals as he saw them, and they're part of a collection of poems which reflect his ideals and his worries at the time, and together with the baptistry, which was 1842, he describes the cathedral in a way that he certainly had been there. This is how the poem starts. it talks about the tower gate, the entrance to the cathedral area.
Of feelings never known before, but which from me shall pass no more. The scene beneath the wicket gate, most beautiful, most desolate, it was St. David's ancient pile, chancel, nave, tower, and windowed aisle, and skirting all the western side, a palace fair, in ruin pride, with storied range in order set, and portal arch and parapet there, hiding from the hearts of men in hollow of the mountain glen. Religion's venerable hold, with wrecks and ruin manifold, burst full on the astonished eye, hoar to sublime antiquity. An evening mist, for by air it hung, a deeper desolation flung, while neath its skirts were dimly seen, within a shaggy drear ravine, black grazing herds in pastures rude, in ivy walled solitude. Signs of wild life, which wandering near made dreariness itself more drear. That mist it seemed a fitting shroud for desolation, and the cloud oblivion's pall, that dropped in tears, as peopled with long vanished years, waving their shadowy wings in gloom, and hovering o'er their ancient home, I do to be. O sight forlorn, and yet so fair in ruin, that transfixed there I gazed, until I seemed to stand upon a strange unearthly land, between the dying and the dead. So many centuries o'er my head, their solemn shade in silence spread, so awful was the drear around, the desolation so profound, while beauty and magnificence strove with a beam, calm but intense, to pierce the darkly mantling gloom, like starlight through a broken tomb, or like the dimly labouring moon that now stood nigh on her white throne. Ancient Nineveh, o'er thee still I linger, sea and flock and hill, peopling with recollections high of more divine antiquity. Sons of a happier, holier day, I cannot deem ye gone away. The moaning wind your requiem sings to all around, your memory clings, no crowded town, no fertile scene, to stand yourself and us between, and what, if marble tombs must die, nature doth monuments supply. You craggy isles that skirt the strand, tradition marks as her own band, in echoing shore and wild seabird, the organ and the choir are heard, and in yon rocks with billows hoar, which seem to watch and guard the shore, the bishop and his clerks are seen. Yet, loved Menevia, if to thee, O mountain vale, my spirits flee, yea, if to thee my fancy yearns, if early love within me burns at thy dear name, my native land, if thrills of pulse in heart or hand, for home.
Rather boring, but there we are. And this gives an idea of his poetic style, and his imagination, sublime and awful, take us into the Gothic world, into the 18th century and early 19th century Gothic world. And his attraction to the country rather than the town, his emphasis on nature, revealing God, his love for his homeland. He says, ancient Menevia, they still.
Ancient Menevia,
and so nature is unchanging for him among the vicissitudes of life. And the political changes, which meant that the House of Commons was no longer Anglican. And he was important as well as his ideas about architecture. The Gothic ideal is in the description of the building, which so it's not his interest in architecture, but in the Gothic style. To him and many, the Oxford movement and the Camden Society in Cambridge and earlier Pugin, they saw that the only Christian architecture was the Gothic architecture, which could express the mysteries of the faith only understood by those who had arrived gradually at an understanding. And he also was interested in the landscape reflecting reflecting the nature of God. And he was troubled by the political changes of 1820s and 1830s. That mysticism which is expressed in the poetry and the architecture, and expressing quietism and reserve in his ideas. And he published an essay on this, which was understood so much that he had to write another essay to explain it. And the idea of reserve doesn't really explain completely what Isaac Williams thought. What he was about was to teach the fundamentals of faith gradually to those who would come into the church. He doesn't have a good idea of the Methodists who are willing to share everything in front of everybody. And he thought that hanging out all your emotional ideas was totally against his theology. But from this visit in 1841, and he produced the work in 1842, that was the only time he went to St. David's. One other thing to emphasize, it's not the description of the cathedral as a ruin at this time. It's not just a metaphor for the problems of the present the Cymru Church of England, but that's how it was in 1841. Literally, the new Dee yn Llywelyn was about to begin a restoration progress, and Heber Isaac Williams in Trinity College was about to begin his study with Edward Freeman of the cathedral, and that led to the restoration of the cathedral and the restoration of worship following the Oxford principles. And that person, Edward Freeman, was William Basil Jones, who became eventually Bishop of St. David's. That doesn't answer the question. Wow, did the work of Isaac Williams arrive in St. David's? He wasn't a canon of the cathedral or any cathedral in Wales or England. So how did this work come there? Well, shortly after the First World War, the George Eckland Williams, the grandson of Matthew David Williams, lived in the treasury in the Cathedral Close, and his books were distributed later to the National Library of Wales and the Cathedral Library. The main delight of George Eckland Williams was dog breeding. He wrote in on some of the books. He included writings about family issues in the books. Isaac Williams was born in Cumberland, and that is noted in the baptism register in Llamadan Fawr. He was the third son of Isaac Lloyd Williams, a solicitor who worked in the Chancery and lived in London at the time. Well, Isaac Lloyd Williams was son of the Reverend Isaac Williams, who was Vicar of Llanrysted. It was a family really on the fringes of being a gentry, and Isaac Lloyd Williams kept his contact with Ceredigion and served as a JP in the county, and two of his daughter married William Wilkerson, and the other marriage the Vicar of Llanrhian Glen near Cumberland. And he married Matthew Davies, the daughter of Matthew Davies, who had been High Sheriff of Cardiganshire, and the Cumberland is to be found above the Ffryn Cleric, and the manor now is an old people's home with quite a new crematorium next door. It was part of the family of Isaac Williams, and when Jones quotes one of Isaac Williams is his earliest poems. Was resting on the ocean wave where that was a description of Cumberland at the time, and Isaac was sent with his two brothers to Harrow School, where he was known as a cricketer and was a classicist, especially in Latin. He notes that there wasn't much religion in that school at the time. He matriculated then to Trinity College, Oxford, but he spent a lot of time in Oriel College, where one of his friends from Harrow's, an undergraduate, there he became under the influence which became Tractarian and an Oxford movement influence. But it was in Aberystwyth 1922 under John Richard Carrog that he met John Keble, who was a tutor in Oriel and would thereafter be the professor of poetry in the university. And he was in touch with Keble after Williams won a prize for a Latin poem, and then he was asked to be part of a reading group near to where Keble was curate, and two of the other leading figures in the movement were there as well, and then Baronet married Isaac Williams' daughter, and So the Tractarian influence was established, but it was in Richard's house in Bridge Aberystwyth that he really came under the influence of Tractarianism, and in rural situations. And this is kind of the Tractarianism that he was part of, keeping the contact with the old high church people of the 18th century, but also in contact with what was happening as a reaction to politics and to evangelicism and liberalism as well. And he tried to take to a double first class in classics, but his health broke, so he had to be satisfied with a BA and a BD, and he failed to go to fellowship in Oriel College, and he was made a deacon in that year and became a curate under James Davies near Sherborne and Bisley, where John Keeble and his brother Thomas Keeble were there. He was there for 2 years writing his poetry and studying Hebrew, but also he started to suffer from the asthma, which bedeviled him for the rest of his life. In 1830, he went back to Oxford as a fellow in Trinity College with other people of the same churchmanship. He was trying to raise the religious and moral standards of the college. He lectured in rhetoric, for example, and from 1841-42 he was vice president of the college, although he was accused of setting too high a standard. He did have an influence on William Basil Jones, William Freeman, Frederick Meyrick, and these had special with St. David and George Palmer and Astley West Haddon. It's noted that William came back to Oxford as and Isaac Williams was and he was curate to John Henry Newman, and Newman was away in the Mediterranean at the time. Now, Isaac was still writing poetry, and he sent poems to the High Church magazine, the British magazine, from 1833 and 9. And 1833 is the year that is seen as the beginning of the Evacuation movement, with Keeble's Sermon on National Apostasy. Isaac Williams concentrated on his own poems at this time. He produced the poems in the British magazine, which was the cathedral poems, and William Wordsworth and George Herbert's influence are seen in them, and maybe William Cooper as well, and all of them looking at the structure of a Gothic cathedral, and also celebrating the Catholic doctrines which are expressed in the different parts of the cathedral. So, as looking from moving from place to place in this ideal cathedral, he comes to the screen which divides the nave from the sanctuary.
Nature withdraws from human sight the treasures of her light. In earth's deep mines or ocean cells, a secret glory dwells. 'Tis darkly through night's veil on high, she shows the starry sky, and where of beauty aught is found, she draws a shade around, nor full air unveils.
And the last poem starts.
Steps of divine providence. Marin Olan, alone now as then of old, the pure of heart behold the soul restoring miracles wherein his mercy dwells. New marvels unto them revealed, but from the world concealed. And pause and fear, when thus aloud we enter the dark cloud, Lord, keep our hearts, that soul and I.
God has prompted us and revealed to us, especially in nature. This is only some can see the hidden truth in the architecture, which can only be gradually revealed to those seeking faith. At this time, Williams used the other poems, including Latin translations, which might surprise us, because he was translating hymns, because he didn't support congregational singing, but and also this was when the tracts for the Times were being produced. Then Newman said that title for Isaac Williams' tracts, that Isaac Williams said that the mysteries of the faith should be reserved to only those who had the discipline to accept them, and this was seen as a criticism of the evangelicals, and Isaac had to write another tract to show what he really had in idea. And he also wrote tract 86 on the Book of Common Prayer. And because of this, he wasn't elected to the chair of poetry when Keble resigned in 1841. In many people, he was the ideal person to follow Keble. Well, he was a poet, but because of his contribution to the tracts, a nasty controversy arose, and it would seem that his application would not be acceptable, and this became a religious controversy. The other candidate wasn't a poet, but he was an anti-tractarian. Both were asked to withdraw. Isaac Williams was ready to do that, but his tractarian supporters rated him not to. So when they estimated the votes that would be cast, and it showed the other side would win, so Isaac withdrew, and then he withdrew from his curacy and left Oxford. He then married Caroline Champney in Bisley, and where he was serving under Thomas Keble. He was then almost fatally ill with consumption, but he recovered, and then he moved to Stinchcombe, to his brother-in-law, John Prevost. They had 6 sons and 1 daughter there, and he was still writing religious material. And then Williams tended more to the old high church patri than the radicalism of some of the Tractarians, like Newman and Froude. And Williams supported the Protestant Reformation, and he was very anti-Roman Catholic. He looked back beyond the Middle Ages to the patristic time. He saw the Roman Catholic Church has lost its way, especially through the Council of Trent. And because Newman was getting closer to the Roman Catholic Church, then Williams said that the tendency to go to Rome, as many did after Newman, many had been evangelicals like Newman had been, or liberals, not high churchmen like Williams themselves. They were more steadfast. They'd always seen the Anglican Church as a Catholic church because it had followed the fathers' teaching. It accepted the apostolic succession and saw the Protestant Reformation as refuting the mistakes of the Middle Ages. So Isaac Williams saw the church as combining the church's teaching and that of Scripture. And like other people in the Bisley circle, he was conservative in churchmanship and in politics. He wasn't willing to break the link between church and state. So quietist in terms of teaching the faith. And from 1842 onwards, when Williams had left Oxford, and then many leaders, including John Henry Newman, went over to Rome. Now, Williams and Newman kept in touch through letters and visits, and he felt, Newman felt that he caused the Isel Williams's last illness when he sent William to catch the train after Newman had stayed with him at Stinchcombe. So going back to Cumberland, even though Williams talks about the nature, about the church here in Wales and in St David's, it's in an abstract way. So, because the poems were to enable the people who understood as reading to read the building symbolically of church principles. And that was important in the Tractarian ideas and the connection between the arts and religion. Professor Kersey Blair talks about Isaac Williams' church poetry and architecture.
Structured shade church poetry and architecture. The church, 'tis thought, is waking through the land and seeking vent for overloaded hearts which she has kindled. Pours her forth anew, breathes life in ancient worship, from their graves summons the slumbering arts to wait on her. Music.
And these are revealing words, not just of Isaac Williams' religious ideas, but his interest in architecture as well. He was one of the he was one of the founders of the Oxford Architectural Society in 1839, and he seconded the proposal to establish the society, which still exists, and slightly older than the Canterbury Camden Society. And two of its founders became Professor of History in University, and one the Bishop of St David's. So, he did got to know a real building expressing the ideals of the moment. Matthew Davis Williams, was his elder brother, was a squire of Cumberland, and wanted to establish a church. In a different Cleric, from the parish of Llanbadarn, but who would need a church nearer. And so Matthew David Williams gave them the land, and there's the sister-in-law James Griffiths gave £1,000 each, and then the rest was raised by public subscription. And the £3,000 raised was very large sum for the time. And the same architect who built Littlemore Church, who designed the church, and the church was consecrated in 1841, and Isaac Williams was the preacher there. So Conor Thalwork was the Bishop of St David's, was anti-Tractarian. It was, but he used Bishop Lancelot Andrews' dedication service, especially translated into Welsh, and Thirlwell had learned Welsh, and the morning service were entirely in Welsh. But apart from the sermon, Isaac Williams probably did know some Welsh, but he probably couldn't speak it very well. So there's a low screen in the church, and the altar is 3 steps higher, symbolizing the Trinity, and the altar is of stone, the only one. The altar was of stone, and the sermon says, "To those who live in this valley, there is a special place where God lives, and God has come near." And we have to remember that there were others who supported the Oxford movement in this area, except Lewis Gilbertson, who was related related Isaac Williams, who became rector of Llancorwen, and then William Basil Jones, who appealed to Isaac Williams to become head of a new college to train priests. Unfortunately, was the visitor o Lampeter that didn't happen in Owen Jones says that Isaac Walton's books and poetry were so popular that they had an influence not just on the church Anglican people, but in worldwide. We now go on to our second speaker, Andrew Hawke, and a similar, the last of his kind, Silvan Evans and his lexicographer and contribution. 90, after studying work in Cornish, and Andrew Hawke worked on the University of Wales Dictionary, and he has specialised in lexicography since then. Well, thank you very much, Mary. I'll try to share my screen so everybody can see the presentation. When I was asked to talk about Daniel Silvan Evans, I realised how little I knew about him as a person, even though I knew about his work. He was considered important enough to be in the Oxford Dictionary, National Biography, and Who's Who as well. That's Dictionary of Welsh Biography. And there are two important articles about him in the Journal of Welsh Biblical Society in 1995, and these articles were written about 70 years ago when he was still an influence. One of the few who recognise his contribution is Mina Morgan, who's in his article in 2002 looks at Welsh lexicography from William Sainsbury onwards, and looks at the influence of John Walters, William Owen too, especially. And Mana Morgan quotes much from the many manuscripts by Silvan who are kept in the Court Mawr collection, put together by J.H. Davies, and he also quotes Richard Hughes's aspects of Welsh lexicography in the 19th century was a reference to contribution Daniel Silvan Evans from 1941. I'm very indebted to these works tonight. So Daniel Silvan Evans was born in 1882 to Sylvanus and Sarah Evans, who were farming in Llanhawdd in Ceredigion. He had very little formal education, only going to school in the winter. Before he started preaching to the congregational group he was part of. He became a minister, and between 1838 and 1840, he studied in Thomas Phillips School in Lwyd before going to the Brecon College of Congregationalists, but he didn't stay there long. Then he worked as a teacher for about 5 years. His first publication was Blodau Ieuanc Arwyddion Prydero Rhyfeddol, which was a collection of his poems and writings, published in 1843. In 1846, He published Tylanegin o Destiny Amrywiol. At this time, he married Margaret Walters, a local farmer's daughter, and his interest in Welsh and the literature Welsh grew, and he published a book about the etymology of Welsh words in 1840, but this actually wasn't published in the end. He was drawn to the Anglican Church, and he went to Lampeter College in 1846. He was employed as a lecturer or a Welsh language tutor, and attained a deacon in 1848 and a priest in 1849. But while he was studying in Lampeter, he accepted an offer in 1842 from the Thomas Reid, the publisher, to publish a new edition of Thomas Jones's English Welsh dictionary. Even though this was supposed to be as a new edition of the original dictionary, he actually wrote a totally new work. But unfortunately, the work took 11 years to complete. But it was published in two large volumes, 1842 and 1858, with 2,000 pages completely, and about 85,000 original English words. So you can see the difference between what the original small dictionary was, and then and Silvan had been begun curate o Llandigwning and Fenllech in Llyn, and then in Llangian in 1852. So Caerfallwch, Thomas Edwards, had published a new dictionary earlier in 1850, Gaelic Cymraeg. This was a large English Welsh dictionary, but about half the size of Silvan's. Caerfallwch had quite a shock when the Silvan's dictionary began to appear, because he didn't know anything about Silvan's lexicography, graphical ambitions, and the dictionaries competed, of course. So Caerfallwch and Thomas G had an argument about this, and when Silvan visited Caerfallwch, Caerfallwch had said he used much of Thomas Jones's dictionary, saying it was the best dictionary like I find, and I made use of it. But at the time, he didn't know about G and Silvan's intentions. So what I'm going to do was the most influential Welsh dictionary at the time, who ideas about orthography had split people who followed the traditional orthography and wanted a new orthography. So who had followed the ideas that words were based on primitive basis, but Phil had gone far too far, and was trying to divide the language into monosyllabic elements, and then used these elements to create more new names. And one of the ways of showing the importance of a language was to emphasize copia, or the words that it has. So William Owen Dew actually included almost 100,000 new 1,000 Welsh words, including his new inventions. Reverend John Walters from Cowbridge, on the other hand, had been much more tradition. Well, even though Walters had produced new names in his dictionary produced in 1770 and 1794, he formed them from words and elements that already exist already, creating words like amdloniant, awyrgylch, braslin, cofrestru, cylchgrawn, dynoliaeth, meddygfa, hawgaeth, and rhyddeuthol were still used today. The idea of Pew did not want to use words derived from English, but sometimes he didn't realize where they came from. The trend in the spoken language was to cambrify English words, and only a few words which were actually coined by people like Pew, which have survived to today. But many people followed Pew in creating these new words. Caerfallwch was a businessman who lived in London, and he produced many new words in the Pew tradition. And someone called this dictionary more Pew than Pew himself. But some of Caerfallwch's coinings have continued, as mae Morgan has shown. Fusoddi mwy cyngor, hirgrwn mwy seg, etc. On the other hand, Silvan was more learned in literature, although he was interested in science and terminology. So Thomas, he was a businessman and wanted to challenge Caerfallwch's dictionary. And Silvan produced about 40 articles to the next work by G. Things soured between G and Silvan, and G because he thought that G had cut down his contributions and things went worse. And G produced another dictionary in 1857, and by Gwirydd ap Rhys, and Silvan said this was replacing his, but Gwirydd ap Rhys's publication was completely different. Silvan thought of producing a new edition of his dictionary, but nothing became of that. And Silvan turned to William Spurrell from Cymru and Rai Jones from Tremadog as publishers. There was a mixed reception to the Silvan's dictionary, and people compared it with Silvan. And Silvan had included derivations from the American English of Noah Webster, which was very dependable. And he took Silvan recognizes his debt to Walters and Pugh, but not Thomas Jones, on which the dictionary was based. The main weakness of Silvan as a lexicographer was to use too many synonyms without explaining what they really meant. So maybe he might have wanted to demonstrate the number of words again in Welsh as how excellent it was. And at 43 years old, he got his first living in 1862 in Llanymawddwy, and then he moved in 1876 in Llanorin, which was worth more in salary. And then he spent the rest of his life in the quietness of the Dyfi Valley there. Before we turn to his great work, let's talk about his literary work. He also worked as an editor and a translator. He edited Edward Samuel's De Veritate Crucis yn Drydaid Gwrynion Grefydd Gristnodol, and he published a Marco Crwydrad by Gwarllen Mechain, and Reverend Evans' work, Ieuan Prydydd Rhydd. He helped William Volskin with translations of 4 ancient books of Wales, and edited Campling Biography by William Rowlands, Literature of Cymru gan Thomas Stevens, and Celtic Remains by Lewis Morris. He edited a Brethon magazine from 1858 to 1860, and Archaeology Comprehensive from 1871 to 1875. He prepared 3 editions of Ellis Gwyn's work, and each one in different orthography slightly as his orthographical ideas change. He published 2 scientific works in 1850, including the elements of astronomy. He published on the orthography in 1861 as a small volume. That volume wasn't very influential, and the battle over the orthography continued. With John Jones, Yvonne, he published a stay in Sioned, and an edition of Welsh Grammar and Other Tracts by Griffith Roberts, 1567, from the Real County. He published his own hymns, for instance, a volume in 1840. He edited several of the editions of the church's hymn book. and so several editions during the 19th century. He co-edited the book of Prayer and Prayer by Dr. Saunders at Dan Howell in 1876, and a volume on the basis of the church's doctrine in the Bible. And one of his last volumes was of poetry in 1898, and reflected one of his earliest publications as well. He was made a part-time lecturer at the University College of Wales in Aberystwyth in 1875 until he retired at 1883 and 65 years of age. His ambition was to produce a definitive Welsh-English dictionary, and to be collecting texts for this. He was seeking to find the oldest vocabulary he could, and he was in correspondence with many Celtic academics throughout Europe, and many of these followed these scientific grammatical ideas of Grammatica Celti by Caspar Seuss in 1853. Silvan was very interested in lexicography and produced articles in 1857 and 1858, and the Blonde Plume Moedden, when he was editor of the Brython. Even though he does have a praise for Pugh, he does criticize him for his over-imaginative etymology. And he didn't look at what people actually said, and it was that. And therefore, a lot of his Pugh's ideas were just built on sand. And then the Philological Linden were starting to produce the New English Dictionary. That's a work that became to be called the Oxford English Dictionary, with James Murray as editor. Silvan was very aware of these developments. Definitely, Silvan had accepted the ideas of the Philological Society. He says in the Brython, a dictionary should include every word that appears, the literature it is based on. The lexicographer shouldn't be deciding which word should be used or rejected. He should record words as he finds them. So he had many correspondents within Wales, and he was advised by Johan Peder Egerton, Phillimore, and John Rhys, the first professor of Celtic in Oxford University. And he began to correspond with Silvan in 1872. They became great friends. And John Rhys had great influence on Silvan, well as buying all sorts of Welsh language dictionaries. He also wrote the unpublished work of William Gambold, one of the influences of John Walters, and he came into contact through John Rhys with Silvan Evans, who was one of his students, and he found that he bought the manuscripts of a scholar now, Robert Roberts, who came from a similar background to Silvan, but who had spent time in Australia in the 1870s. And Roberts, when he was ill, offered his work, like a lithographer work, to Silvan for a couple of pounds when he was ill, and he couldn't furnish this himself. And Roberts' work must have been a great help for Silvan, especially interpreting the old literature. And Roberts warned Silvan not to depend too much on the works of Pugh and Iolo Morgannwg. And Silvan was introduced to Lady Llanover and copied many of Iolo's manuscripts, including the fake poems of David ap Gwilym. But Silvan warned John Morris Jones about the fact that Iolo wasn't dependable. So in the end, Silvan found simple Martian Co. Tribner and Co. With William Sverrell Carolyn as his printers. What Jane Silvan's mind about publishing was that Lady Llanover was able to contribute £1,250 to the work. So that would have been at least £150,000 today. Well, Silvan sent material directly to Sperrell. The first part came out in 1887 for 10 and 6 for 420 pages, including the letter A only. And John Rhys showed the work to James Murray, who was highly pleased with the work, and there were very good reviews. The second part on letter B came out for £5 in 1888. Sperrell lost patience with Silvan, and Silvan lost his wife, Margaret, in 1889 in a road accident in Mountclef. They'd already lost 3 sons and 3 daughters, and leaving only one son, John Henry Silvan Evans, who started to help his father with the great work, having worked with John Rhys. The third part didn't come out in 1893, when the University of Wales was established, when Silvan was 75 years old. So this was the first volume in 1,262 pages. And then Silvan and his son published for 564 pages for 14 shillings. When Lady Llanover died in 1996, the sponsorship came up. But his friends ensured a Sibyl's pension of £100 a year for him. and a fellowship for £100 from the Jesus College in Oxford, 1987 onwards. And so then the publications became fewer and slower, and Silvan died in 1903, and the last part wasn't published until 1906 under Henry Silvan Evans, his name, and Spurrell was the publisher then. The London publishers having probably pulled out. According to Morgan, there are 63,000 words in the dictionary up to Enid, and there are less than 38,000 articles in the University of Wales dictionary for the same number of letters. So Silvan must have included words which were not living in the language, but he liked to use every form of the word he could find. So in the University of Wales dictionary, Silvan is dictionary is quoted 2,100 ways, but well, as Menna Morgan said, Silvan was the best lexicographer of the 19th century. Even though he had no university education, he was a true academic and an authority on the Welsh language. He was honoured by the academic world and the church. Lampeter College gave a BD degree in 1868, and the Commodorian Society awarded him a badge in 1887. In 1901, he was awarded D.Litt, an honorary D.Litt by the University of Wales. He was made an honorary canon of Bangor in 1888, and Rendry of Llanfair in 1881, and Chancellor of the Cathedral at Bangor in 1895. He was buried in Cemmaes, and a new gravestone was set there in 1856, and you can see T.H. Parry Williams in the door in the crowd there, if you look carefully, and most of his manuscripts were brought by John Humphreys Davies, one of the founders of the National Library, and they were brought to the National Library as part of the Court Mawr collection after Davies died in 1956. But Lewis Jones, as Menna Morgan notes, that the between 1818 and 1858 were the golden age of the literary priests, between the birth of Silvan and his first dictionary, and Silvan remained a working lexicographer until the early 20th century, and certainly he was last of his kind. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And that was very interesting. So now we'll have a couple of minutes for people to ask questions, either on the lecture we've just heard, or the one by Bishop Wynne. When Gwendraeth spoke about the debate about William Owen Pugh and the new edition of the Bible, and it became an argument between the Calvinistic churches and the church in Wales, because the church was more conservative, want to keep the old spelling, but it became almost a doctrinal discussion. Would you like to make a comment? Well, I know this was a very controversial matter at the time, because Pugh's ideas were so revolutionary, and most of the Welsh people did not accept them, and his publisher wasn't happy, and he insisted to a version of his dictionary in 1806, which was even more, which was more conservative, which was in the more the orthography we were more familiar with now, and but Pugh's ideas were very influential for a long time, including what the orthography in Patagonia by now. So we escaped having an edition of the Bible in Pugh's orthography. Anybody else with a question? Can I just say a word? If there are no other questions, I've just been writing writing a review of the first volume of Gofal and Gwynllan, to thank everybody who have to do with that publication. Not just the people who contributed, those who have edited and arranged and raised money and organized these events on Zoom, and just thank everybody involved, especially the staff of St. Padans. Thank you very much for that. Thank you very much, Canon Enid Morgan, for those words of thanks, and thanks very much to the Bishop Wynne and Andrew